Hello and welcome. The pros and cons of an IMF bailout. Now, once referred to as an IMF baby, Ghana seems to have run back to the arms of the IMF to rescue the economy once again. Now, one may argue, however, that before we started going to them for their help after the aftermath of the 1966 coup, Ghana was in good standing to be self-reliant country. So what happened at all that we can't seem to find our feet? Now we hear everybody talking about the IMF. Indeed, is there real cause for alarm, or it's just one of those things where every country should, go every now and then? Is there any country that's been to the IMF that has got a good story to tell? Well, with me in the studio to tell me is Sydney Casely-Hayford, a policy analyst, and Paul Frimpong, who is a chartered economist. They would educate me today. My name is Nana Sakwa, and this is PM Express. Well, the pros and cons of an IMF bailout, and we're just trying to find out, is there any cause for alarm at all? Because everybody seems to be in a panic that, oh, we go to IMF and it's not good, and it's... What is the fact? So, with me and correctly a financial analyst, Sydney Casely-Hayford, and Paul Frimpong, a chartered economist, to educate us as to what the implications are. What are the good sides of it and what are the bad sides of it? Gentlemen, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Paul, chartered economist. Sydney seems to have nominated you. Paul, what are the good side of it and what are the bad side of it? I mean, should we panic? I mean, what is it? Educate us.
Well, I think IMF and its member countries and countries going back to the IMF because they find themselves in a very tight economic corner that they seem to be missing out on what they are supposed to do in their respective countries to really move the economy forward. And I think there's an euphoria around that IMF and what they've been doing because of what they've been doing over the period with countries that have gone to them. Ghana is an example. We've gone to the IMF before, and people are mostly afraid of the conditionality, as they put it, because they give you a program that you have to go through, and the program, part of it is the money they're going to give you, and the condition that you're supposed to satisfy before the money is given to you, because they don't just give you money in full. I think they give in installments, so you have to go through certain procedures, you have to go to certain reforms in your economy, respective economy, before they will give you the full money. So you have to, follow the progress in the economy as and when they give you the money. So I think the issue with the IMF now and why a lot of people are panicking in terms of going to the IMF is mostly about the conditionalities. And me, I do not find fault with the IMF itself, but with the economy that goes to the IMF, because they are there as a lender of last resort, and the IMF is funded by some group of rich nations. I can give you the numbers later on. US, Japan, and there's some other countries. So these rich nations give the IMF money to support developing economies. So the issue is that they give you the money with their programs, their technical issues attached to it. So you come to your respective country, develop, you pay their fund back, and they use the money to support other countries. So that is the strategy. So then you can't just give you the money and then come and use or spend the money on anything that you want. So. And that's where people don't even understand how the IMF works. So it's their system they've built. So it's a matter of you deciding whether you want to go to them or not. And since the lender of last resort, it's assumed that you go to them when you are in a situation where your own internal policies cannot help you you understand? So they call it the homegrown policy that we are talking about in Ghana now, homegrown policy, what have you. So the issue is that they are there. So you go there because you find yourself in a very tight corner. I mean, your options are almost out now. So they are there to support you. They give you money, but they give you conditions backing the money, because that's how they work. So the system is there. If you want to go to them, you go to them when you need them. So I think that is the whole issue about the IMF and why people are panicking, because of the condition that they attach to. And the condition, as I said, is something that they've structured. That's how they act. That's how they give out their money to the economies that belong to the membership of their. So I think we should look at it from that angle. Yeah.
Sydney, I mean, I want to jump there again a bit. How much money would they give us?
I don't know.
I mean, would they 3 billion? Would they give us that?
Well, we've never got that much before, and we are in a worse situation now than we were. If you recall, in 2009, Ghana did actually approach the IMF for help, and we were given about $600 and something million, which we didn't hear the kind of hue and cry we're hearing now. It was welcome, and we used it to the best of our advantage. So this is not the first time we're going to the IMF, and it wasn't only in 2009. We have been to the IMF previously a few times. But you see, what people have to understand is there's nothing wrong with approaching a banker for help. When things are dire and you are in a very, very bad position, you usually would go to whoever you can to see whether you can borrow money. I say, so, you know, those questions will be asked. No. And then when they do decide to help you, they will tell you specifically the conditions under which you should have. So we're not doing anything that is abnormal or inhuman or subhuman. We're asking for help. Unfortunately, we are asking for what is now being called a bailout. And the bailout connotes a situation which is at less than ground level. You are really, really struggling. So you need somebody to lift you up, you know, by a bucket full of help. And that's where we are. So everything that you do when you go asking for help comes with some conditions. And it's up to us to really determine whether we are prepared for those conditions. Yes, the IMF will put certain things down, but the IMF is very clear as to what it understands will fix the economic malaise in which we find ourselves. So there will be some items, and if we're going to go into that later, I'll reserve whatever it is I have to say and come back. But I don't think people should be overly concerned or worried that we are going to the IMF. In fact, we should be a little glad that we are going to the IMF, because if we don't go, I don't know what the other options are. There are no other options left on the table, and this has got to be the way that we can at least start trying to dig ourselves out of the mess in which we find ourselves.
Paul, so is this just money that the central bank is going to keep as a reserve to back up their currency? Is this money for a road, a project? Because as a citizen of the country, I don't know what our national plan is. So if they give you this money, what is the money for? I mean, just to pay the TUC guys? I mean, what is it for?
Yeah, I think I want to give a typical example, like the MCA that the compact two that we just signed on. I think it's coming directly to energy sector. I think about 70 or so percent is going to be fixed on the energy sector. And so they did their own analysis of the economy, because they have their people here on the ground to get to know what's actually is affecting the economy. That's prompting them to give us this amount of money. So they do the analysis and see that no, when it comes to the energy sector of this country, that is the area that can help the economy to grow. So we are giving this money not for anything but to support the energy sector, because this way we think is actually affecting your economy. So I'm sure that's the same way the IMF is going to go. Fine, we have to go with our own plan, because that's why we have negotiated. But really, I will talk about negotiation though, because I'm not sure this about negotiation, about what they have for you, because you come there with your problem. You tell them the problem, they say this is what we have for you. It's not a matter of negotiation.
So you don't have a leg to stand on, basically.
I'm not. It's like you're negotiating with a gun pointed at your head. I mean, you just came there, you know, with your bare hands, trying to talk to them to help you. So I think that's the issue around it. So it's more of they know what's actually wrong with the economy, because from time to time we're giving out some reports that we've all been discussing, IMF reports. One that came was that we are subjected to external shocks because of the way we are dependent on external source of funding to develop our economy. Well, what we saw in 2012, where grants from development partners didn't come, about 25% short of what we're supposed to get from our development partners or donor partners, they call them, because they also had their own problem at home that they had to deal with. So because of that, they weren't able to give us the money to support our budget. So we fell short in the government, the money that we were supposed to receive, yet we were spending above the target reserve in terms of public sector waste and whatever. So I'm sure they will look at what really is bothering you, because you go to them with all the areas that you think you need support. So if it's currency, the currency will surely be on the agenda, of course. So if they look at the currency and they say that no, if you're able to support you in terms of trying to stabilize your currency and it's going to help in the medium to the long term, why not? They'll give the money to support you in that sense. So I'm sure we have to go in there with our priority. This is where we think it's affecting us. So if we are looking at agriculture, maybe we want to support the agriculture sector because we think importation in terms of agriculture food is actually affecting the economy. So you go, you tell them that, they all look at those numbers and say, no, if you give you money to support agriculture, it's not going to help. But when you give you money to support maybe educational health sector, is going to help you. So I think that's where they are going to look at to give us the money in case they want to give. So it's more of trying to look at what is actually affecting the economy, what you came to them with, and then they will look at that to prioritize and then give you the money to support.
Sydney, I want to go back to the negotiation because now we are supposedly middle income, so maybe we have something to stand on to argue, or middle income. There's the oil coming next year apparently, so that gives us somewhere to negotiate. Again, I'm told because of the Supreme Court trial, we didn't pull machetes, so it means we are fairly sound and stable. But once we have been able, if we do argue out all these cases, what is the time we're going to use the money for?
Well, in the first place, let's just be clear that Ghana is not a middle-income economy. Okay? Ghana is a lower middle-income economy. And at this stage, we are probably a low-income economy because our GDP hasn't really been growing as much as it can. The enigma we have is that we are touting that GDP is growing very fast, and yet it's not translating into infrastructure, it's not translating into development. So there are question marks as to whether or not the statistics, the macro indicators, are really true and correct or not. And I think this is the confused message that we are throwing out there, that we have all these wonderful macroeconomic indicators, and yet the underlying truth is that we are not meeting, we are not supporting those indicators. So there's a whole arena there that has to be cleared so that we are in no deceptive mood that we are a middle income economy. How do we negotiate and how do we get out of this? Okay, I say this, that there are prospects down the line. And if you look at all the solutions that are being proffered that we need to do, if you take a look at the supposed homegrown solutions that government has, and let's also say this, that the homegrown solutions, as they are calling them, is a document that government released on the 14th of April of 2014. And it's the economic and financial policies for the medium term. All right? That's what that document is. And that's what we are calling the homegrown policies. If you read the IMF's own analysis of where Ghana situates, it does talk about these policies. All right? In two paragraphs, it mentions that government has been explaining to them what they are going to do in order to be able to turn things around, which they are now calling homegrown policies. Now, when you call something a homegrown policy, then you have to be very clear on the fact that anything that is homegrown, it means it's developed by you and it's identified by you and it's unique to you. You don't just go and take an accounting system like GIFMIS and say you are implementing an accounting package and therefore that is homegrown. It's not homegrown, all right? It's not homegrown. What will be homegrown, if you should understand it from a layman's perspective, if you go to the Kentucky Fried Chicken place on Oxford Street or at the Marina Mall or elsewhere, the chicken is differently spiced from what you would get in the US. Even when you ask for the regular mild version, the spicing is a little different. And if you ask for the hot version, it's much hotter than you would get internationally. Reason being that Ghanaians like spices, Ghanaians enjoy the pepper, and Ghanaians choose to have a spicier chicken than the standard, because Kentucky has a standard mix which it uses. In this case, the particular product that we are putting out there, our spicy chicken, is a homegrown solution to take care of the palate of the Ghanaian, because it's originating from our needs here and our solutions. So I don't want, I am particularly disappointed with this attempt to try and say we have got homegrown solutions, like as if we have created certain things. There are one or two things that are definitely suited and tailored to Ghana, no question about that. But on the whole, all those solutions are normal economic solutions when you are in a crisis. And here's our crisis. Whatever money we get from the IMF, what are we going to use it for? Our problem is really in two arenas in this economy. It's in our wages bill, and it's in our interest payments. All right? Our short-term debt and our long-term debt profiles are a problem. Between the two, between our salaries and wages, public sector and civil service wages, and the interest payments, the revenue that we are making from taxes is not enough to cover just those two line items, just those two.
Wow.
We spend about 9 billion cedis in wages and allowances, and we spend another 2.5 billion thereabouts in debt repayments currently. When you add those two up, that's domestic debt. When you add those two up, you are nowhere near. If you take both the international debt and the domestic debt, it's about 4 billion. So when you add the two together, you add that to your payroll, you really cannot cover.
And how much are we collecting in revenue?
We are collecting about 17 thereabouts in revenue.
Okay.
And beyond that revenue, you have what we call the earmarked funds, the statutory funds, which you have to put aside, because those are clearly statutory obligations which you have to put aside. And then there are other things else also that you have to identify with. So we are in a very difficult pit hole of no cash. If we go and take $1 billion, say, from the IMF, we have to be careful how we apply that money. Because if you put that money into payroll, and the IMF is fully aware of where these potholes are, because we have given them our document, our homegrown solutions, we are giving it to them and saying this is what we are going to be doing. And captured in those homegrown solutions are all of these things that we are doing. You see, sometimes we tend to be a little overcritical because we are a bit disaffected with what is going on. But if you read the homegrown policies, you will see that everything that we talk about openly on public and print is written there in black and white by our own government. The problem is the government doesn't implement or cannot implement or seems to be incapable of implementing what it is recommending as a solution. That's the challenge. In the document there, you will read that government needs to increase revenues. Now, how is it going to increase those revenues? It talks about trying to bring the informal sector into the tax net. Good idea. We've been talking about that for a long time. But government hasn't even started doing that. All right? We talk about how we are going to, we should be able to manage ghost names on the payroll. Yes, but we are not doing it positively enough. We are all, once in a while, we'll identify that we have found 400 ghost names on the payroll. But 400 names on the payroll is not going to make a dent. I think that the economic advisor, Nimoy Thompson, the other day was doing the rounds and stating a statistic that there are over 40,000 drivers in the Ghana Education Service alone. How do you get 40,000 drivers for just one sector? Education service, 40,000 drivers. We only have 10 regions. So if you've got 10 regions and you've got 4,000 drivers on average per region, what exactly are these persons doing? So common sense will tell you that it's an over-bloated payroll. Now, the rational thing to do is to cut that payroll, look at it critically, and eliminate it. And then you hear the noise from the politicians. Oh, but if you do that, then people's families will suffer. And people's families, people will not have enough money, and then they're going to go and demonstrate, and then we will not win a political power. This is the mantra you will hear. So the problem we have is not that the economic team or the economic advisors don't know what to do. Ghana knows exactly what can be done to fix this problem, all right? And the powers that be know it. What we don't have is the conviction that we should do it and do it now and do it properly and be able to fix the problems going forward, because we are too conscious of wanting to stay in glorified positions. This is the only problem we have. The implementation is wrong, and there's too much of a want to be in power consistently and constantly.
Paul, so ultimately, the IMF is going to increase our debt?
Yes, but before I come to that, I want to touch on what Sydney was saying about the homegrown policy. And for me, the 21st century and beyond is going to present different case of economic dynamics in the whole, because look at the crisis that we saw in 2007, 2008. So we saw what's happening in Europe in 2012. It goes to show that really the economies that we used to know have actually tilted, actually changed, and then there needs to be more thinking in terms of how we apply economic policies than to really. So what I'm trying to say is that economic policy is based on experience. Okay, this is how we are developing. These are our characteristics. So based on that, these are the policies that we think will be good for us. Okay, because I see that we all do not look at the world the same. We all look through the world in a veil of assumptions and presumptions. So these are based on that we come up with this ideology that we all practice around. So people are saying they are socialists or capitalists, whatever. It's based on their experience as they live. So based on that, we should be able to come up with policies that we think is going to be geared towards our development. So I think that's where we are missing it out. So looking at we going to the IMF and how it's going to help us, I think there's another thing that I want to come in with. Looking at the aid model that we saw in 1947, okay, where George Marshall, who was the Secretary of State of the United States, that was when the name was given to him as the Marshall Plan to recover Europe from the World War II, I mean post-World War II. These countries were very, very fragile, they were very fragmented. So they needed support, they needed money to revive the economy. So US, I mean, that was the first US foreign intervention policy at that time. So in 1947, they gave out money to these East European countries to recover. And then it helped them. About 4 or so years later on, these countries were able to revive and they were able to grow to support the whole global community. So in the 1960s, I mean, that was post-independence Africa. A lot of countries were also coming out of independence. So these countries were also seen as being fragile. So what did these people say? They said that, oh, we have universal vehicle. Jump on into it. Economics law is like the law of engineering. What works somewhere works everywhere, which is totally wrong. This comes back to what I was saying, is that we need to get policies which are based on our experience. Economics law is not static. It depends on the environment. You look at your situation, you look at the characteristics, you look at how you are living, how you. I mean, you've been in this state for about 50 years and over, 57 years after independence, and yet we do not seem to have our own clear policy in terms of how we want to develop. And that's where my challenge is. So they said the aid model is going to help because they say that we don't have savings in there, so they're going to replace the savings, the money they're going to give us. This money is going to drive investment. Investment is going to drive economic growth, and we see transformation in the economies. Ironically, after 50 or so years, after falling onto this aid model train and then trying to move us around, poverty has rather seen to be increasing, seen on the rise. Whilst at that time about 10% of Africans were very poor, now we are talking about 60 or so percent of Africans being poor. Why did that happen? Because this money was given to countries as and when they are poor. So if you are a poor country, you get more money. So it's more of a vicious cycle. So if you are poor, you get more money. So what do? Leaders will support bureaucracy. They want to be in power because that's what we love to be. I mean, African leaders want to be in power. So this money will come because it's free money. You are not going to, I mean, struggle. You're not going to have to depend on your private sector, your own domestic market to raise money. The money is going to come freely to support you. So they thought less. So they were able to think outside the box to develop their own internal system to develop. So that is where a lot of people have issues when we talk about falling on external, I mean, sources to support our system. That means that I'm not saying it's wrong because we depend, because we are in a global economy now. When it's good for us in Ghana and good for us in Africa, it's good for us in the whole world. So I'm sure that's where we need to look at. And the IMF, I think.
Let me take a quick break here, and when I come back, I just want to find out that, because at the moment we are in debt and we're sort of going to borrow our way out of debt. After things have leveled out, we now add the IMF debt to our already 4.5 billion that we are paying out, and then we end up again there, or how does it work? The economists will tell us. Stay tuned. The pros and cons of an IMF bailout. Should we panic? Is there any cause for alarm? But what I want to find out, listening to the experts here, is that at the moment we are so much in debt, we can't see our way forward. So we're going to the IMF to get more money and then bring it into the system and sort of ease things out. Do we then add the IMF debt to our original debts that we don't seem to know what to do with it, and then pay later, or how does it work?
Yes, of course. They give you money, you have to pay back. They give you a certain number of years that you have to pay. Within you have to pay the money.
But But we're already in debt, right?
Yeah, we're already in debt. I think we are around 56 or so percent, and the threshold is around 60% or so, 56% of our total GDP also. So I think that's where we are now. We are getting closer to the threshold of 60%. And I'm sure by the time we get this money from the IMF and some other money that we've already contracted coming on board, I'm sure we will get to the 60% mark, or maybe we might be exceeding. And so the question will come that we have to pay the money, of course. When they give you money, you're going to pay. And this IMF loan, looking at where we are as lower middle income economy, you're not going to get the same terms, concessional loans that they used to give us when we were, developing economy or least developing economy. Yeah, it's about numbers. That one is numbers.
By force.
Yeah, by force.
Because
we are not lower middle income.
Yeah, but you see, what can be done? Either somebody comes and gives us money and says, "Monfa, take it." All right? And use it to sort yourselves out, which a benevolent uncle will do. Okay? But Ghana doesn't have one anymore. So that is one option, which is a dead option. The second option is where we are going. Go to the IMF and borrow money cheaper. Okay? Because the money, the interest rate at which they will give us the money will be much cheaper than what we are paying now. Remember that we just issued a bond for 400 million cedis, and it cost us 25.2%.
That's high.
All right? It is ridiculously high.
That's high.
That's a quarter of everything, which means that in 4 years you'll be paying back 100% of what you took.
Wow.
All right? And that's been deferred. So we are running interest rates that are way beyond anything normal. But what is it doing? It is bringing people into the country who want to come and turn their money around quickly. They come, and the interest rates here are so high, they'll deposit a certain amount of money, maybe for 3 months, then on the 91-day bill, or for a year or 2 years. And as soon as they make enough money, they pull their money out, because they've made the money that they're looking for. If you can make 25% risk-free on a treasury bill note, why will you not do it? Everybody's doing it. The banks are doing it. Everybody who has any excess liquidity is doing it. So that's the norm. Now, what else can you do? You see, you cannot borrow your way out of debt unless you have consistently cheaper money. If the IMF says, okay, look, we'll give you 500 million at 10%. When you finish paying for it, come back for another 500 million and keep rolling it, all right, for as long as you're turning out good money. But the thing is this solution is in two parts. You need more revenues, and you need to stop the expenditures. All right? You can't do otherwise, because in any business, if you are in debt and you need to pay down your debt, you need profit. In government, we don't call it profit. We call it excess revenue over expenditures. So we need to get to a point where our revenue intake is bigger than our expenditure. Only when we get there can we start allocating some of that revenue intake, the surplus, towards paying down the debt. Now, how do you get there? There are two key areas that you can cut in expenditure. Between the education sector and the health sector, the salaries and wages and allowances is 6.1 billion cedis a year as of 2012. There's 4.5 billion in education, 1.6 billion in healthcare. That's 6.1 billion. Now, you can rationalize a lot of that, not by laying people off, but by allowing private sector to take over the chunk of that portion. So government can fund it in a different way, all right? But it will not have the responsibility of carrying all that burden. And you'll be able to tax people a lot more better when you do that. I mean, there's a whole model that I've offered, and it's there, you know, for anybody to want to read it. So there are pockets where you can cut your expenditures, and then you stop the excessive borrowing, so you don't keep piling on more interest on your debt. Then you ensure that you have enough and significant revenues coming in. Government has to be creative enough to see how it can bring in more revenues, and that means primarily, number one, the informal sector, and then two, getting people who are not paying their taxes to start paying taxes better. Even if people have to pay 10 cedis of tax a month, take it from them. Because those tiny drops of water will amount to a significant amount. Though in simple terms, that is what needs to be done. If government can see its way clear towards doing some of those things, bringing in revenues, rationalizing its expenditures, and pushing in such a way that it can actually have a surplus of revenue over expenditure, it can start serving its debt, and it will work.
See, what's going to happen is, if this deal goes ahead, number one, they will tell us to slash labor force because it's just way too much.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure even executive expenditure, they will maybe venture there. I was doing my little research, and I think apart from Korea, who was a different story, there isn't another country on earth that's gone to IMF and come out as a bursting economy. You're always sort of locked into, because they tell you, like you said, we think that this side of your economy is good, rather than you going to tell them. So, I mean, are we just burying ourselves in more debt, or is there light at the end of the tunnel? Because there isn't a country. I mean, in Africa, I think the failure rate was 73% of countries that have gone to IMF and never made it out, you know, and worldwide. So, I mean, what are we doing?
You see, what the IMF will ask us to do, the conditions, are no different from what I've tried to outline, except they'll be specific. We must stop the subsidizing of utilities and stop the subsidizing of fuel. Those things are not useful. We have to allow all that to happen by market forces. The depreciation of the cedi can be solved by having a better, more open market exchange rate regime. And that's one of the things that they will ask you to do. They will ask you to find ways of bringing in revenue. You should be doing that anyway. They will ask you to cut your labor force because you're carrying too much of a burden. We should be doing that. They will ask you to stop borrowing and stop borrowing at such high rates and stop crowding out the private sector and allow the private sector to really participate. And there is nothing wrong with that. So all the remedies that they are going to propose, trust me, are not something that we should not be doing. The difference here is the IMF will insist that you do these things and do them at particular times before they release additional funds. With the situation we have now, government makes a decision whether it wants to do it or not at its own political expediency. And if it feels that it is not politically expedient to do it, then it won't do it. Which is why every 4 years we go into an election cycle and we go into a bust, because during that year, all they want to do is to spend money in order to be able to get the votes that they require. So they allow everything to run amok, and they go and they spend as much as they need to in order to be able to keep themselves back in power. If you go for this bailout now, there will be strict controls over how you use the money. And there should be strict controls over how you use the money. So there is nothing wrong with what the IMF will ask us to do. These are things that we should be doing anyway. And these are things that we ourselves have identified that we should be doing anyway. All this will do is going to put pressure on the politicians to actually get up there and make the right decisions. That's really it. Of course, then there's the corruption issue.
I was just going to come back, because the IMF is not particularly concerned about your corruption per se, are they?
They are actually, because I was trying to look at the past 2 years, the conditionality that you have attached to their loans to member countries. I think on average they give 20 conditions on average to each loan that they're giving to member countries for the past 2 years. I think there was a report last 3 years or so that came out there saying that they're going to rather reduce on the conditionality that's attached to their loans because of the criticism that was coming from all angles, from all parts of the world. Especially following the Asian 1997 crisis, which the IMF came into Malaysia, Thailand, but never helped them. We saw what happened in Kenya in terms of deregulating their financial sector, where it's led to a lot of corruption in the country. So I think they came out to say that they are going to reduce the number of conditions they are going to attach to their loans when it comes for them. But in the last 2 years, I've seen rather the number increasing, 20 conditions on average to each loan that they give you. Sydney has mentioned a lot of them, and I'm sure corruption is going to be part of it, because, as I said, you are going to them, fine, you go to them, you tell them this and this are the challenges that you are facing. And I said also that they also have their people on the ground. They know how the economy is progressing, because from time they're issuing some report analysis that we've done on the Ghanaian economy, trying to look at the loopholes that we are all seeing now, that we identify that these are the things that are affecting us. And corruption is going to be high on the agenda because there are so many schemes that we've all discussed very widely in the Ghanaian media in terms of some of the Suba, the Jida, and the rest that we've all seen the stories around those schemes. So I'm sure they are also aware of something. We cannot spend money anyhow as a government. This is a scheme that you created, and this is how messy they've become. So they have the numbers. They know that this sector, they know that this amount of money was used in this scheme, which never produced any result. And that's corruption because you looted, and you shared among yourselves. With your cronies and what have you. So I'm sure corruption is going to be high on the agenda because they're giving them money, looking at how you're able to make sure their money is going to work. Because you need to give them money, it works, you pay them back, they're able to support other countries as well. So I'm sure corruption is very, very going to be on the agenda. Just as they talk about privatization, also going to be high on the agenda because so many public institutions that they will get to know that they are very, very inefficient. Okay, these institutions are not producing the result that is mandated of them. So they're going to tackle one of them as well, or most of them. Because look at what the ECG is going to do under the Compact 2 and what have you, trying to privatize their distribution side of it because they say they are being inefficient. Because you have managerial problem, you have operational problem, you have financial management problem here and there. So I'm sure they're going to look at corruption from all angles, especially targeting public institutions. Okay, so these are areas that they are going to look at. So public institutions, they think that there's corruption in there. There's some schemes that government have created, and they think a lot of money passing through those schemes that are not producing results, which here we have also identified that those schemes are not really helping us. So I'm sure they're going to look at corruption in a very wider sense in that direction.
So if all you're saying, you guys are saying, why is it that country after country that go to the IMF don't succeed? And in any case, all the economies seems to shrink rather than expand. But what you're saying it seems relevant that, of course, cut your sizes, cut your expenditure. But so what is it that doesn't make the country survive?
The IMF's approach is a steady as she goes approach. It's let's make sure that we do things properly and consistently. And don't rush key things, and don't go and do things that you have not assessed properly. So their whole tactic is that if you're going to grow GDP, you want to grow GDP by maybe 1 or 2%, grow it. Don't go and suddenly think that you're going to grow GDP by 10% and go and start putting in measures to do things like that. So the difference is that the IMF will want you to keep your pace steady, but the country wants to go faster. And we, the people also, we don't want to wait for 10 years before we are able to increase our payroll by 5%. We want our payroll to go up and to go up accordingly so we can manage. So there's a difference in strategy of how you want to do this. And that is what makes those who are following the IMF principles, maybe there's a program for 3 years. After 3 years, they don't want to renew it, because they are too constrained and too restricted. So they won't renew it. And the offshore is that when you don't renew it, you go over the board with what you think you're supposed to do, and then suddenly everything turns haywire. Ghana's problem is a classic one now. It's classic because we are out of cash. And even as we are going for the IMF bailout, we still need to pay salaries, and we still need to service the high interest costs. And we need to make sure that other little infrastructure projects that we have committed to putting counterpart funds in are actually made, and we can survive. So we are caught it's a classic cash crunch in which we are. Most businesses and households will fall into that from time to time. Your ability to get out is a matter of fortitude, the strength of conviction that you will succeed, and your ability to take the decision and actually implement it and follow it. This is what we have to do if we are going to make it clear and get out of this. But I estimate that we need at least $2 to $3 billion from the IMF to actually get this thing working. It's a lot of money.
Where would you put this $2 to $3 billion?
If I have $2 to $3 billion, my first thing is to fix my energy bill, my energy problems.
Now, that's leading to my next question. Will the IMF allow you to use their money to fix your energy?
Well, they just voted $7 billion for Africa for power solutions. You know, the U.S. announced a $14.7 billion facility for what they call Power Africa, which they are going to use to support the energy sector in Africa at the USA Africa Summit, which we are there now. And the World Bank has just announced another $7 billion to add to that fund. So there is money available for energy, and we will be eligible to go and apply for some of those funds at the right time. And especially if we can actually get some money and fix the current ECG issues, then that will become available. So yes, the IMF will agree, the World Bank will agree that you can actually do some. But the World Bank is already doing work in that sector. It's not like I said they're not doing anything. They are doing work. A lot of support has been given, capacity building work, logistics work, and stuff like that. But we still say also that we need to be at a point where your energy issues, your power issues are so okay. In other words, they are so fixed that you and I are not going to worry. If we have great dreams and innovations of trying to set up some kind of manufacturing something and setting up industry, energy supply should be the least of our worries. We should be able to go out there and do it. And industrialization will only pick up when the energy is available and is available cheaply enough. You see, it doesn't help us when you have a gas project that was supposed to have been completed in December of 2012. And even as we sit now, we don't know when it will be completed. Because the whole strategy behind it was that the gas will come in and we will have to stop buying crude. We are buying about $1 billion worth of crude a year. And if we can supplement that with gas, we can probably shave about 2/3 of that cost, because gas is far cheaper to use. So when you have a project like that, that is delayed for over 2.5 years, what is happening is, apart from the fact that you're not getting the benefits of that cheaper cost, you're also saddled with an inefficient executive sitting at the Ghana Gas Company who are not being sacked and who are sitting there despite the fact that they're only one single project that is far more critical than anything since Akosombo is late by 2.5 years. And yet they are sitting there, nobody's saying a word. And they are being allowed, and they are being paid a salary, and big fat salaries.
They throw a new date out there, and I keep asking, who has asked you for a date? But every now and then you look in the papers and say, oh, by the end of this month it will be there. I'm going to take a break, and then when we come back, I want to find out if indeed the IMF will let us use their money for things like energy. Well, the pros and cons of the IMF. Is it good or bad? Should we panic or should we not? But just before we went on a break, I was just finding out that if indeed we can borrow money from the IMF and they would allow you to put it in energy so that you could maybe add value to cocoa beans, maybe build a gold refinery, maybe set up a clothing industry by planting cotton and bailing yourself out of this mess by creating real hard job. Am I just painting a fairy tale, or it's not possible?
No. It's very, very possible. And as part of the solutions that Ghana itself has proposed is this Ghana Infrastructure Fund, the Ghana Investment and Infrastructure Fund, which has been proposed as a solution to sorting all of this. And it is a good idea. It's a good idea. Now the question is, how do you get money into it? How do you put money into it? You see, you can go and borrow money, and you can ring fence it, and you can specifically allocate it to something. Look at what we did with the Millennium Challenge 1, the Compact 1, and we're going to do the same thing with Compact 2, where it's ring fenced. Government has no interference. There's a body that runs it, and it was executed and delivered on time. So there are ways of doing that if you want to. But we cannot go and borrow another $500 million. We can't do it. Compact 2 is a grant that we are being given benevolently by the USA. So we're going to take it. But if you go now to go and borrow money, 10-15%, you are right in what you said. We are adding to our debt burden. It doesn't matter how small it is, how little the interest is. We are adding to the debt burden. Now, one of the problems that government is facing is, how do I retire all these high interest debts that I've borrowed, all these treasury bills that they have issued on which they are servicing the debt periodically. How are they going to be able to find cheaper money to be able to retire that debt so that the interest burden goes down? Now, you have one small advantage. You can go and borrow dollars, and because the exchange rate is depreciating, you can convert that money into CDs, and it will retire some of your existing CD debt, but it will increase your dollar debt. So it's a trade-off you have to figure out, whether you can go borrow money at lower interest rates on the dollars and use that to supplement your high interest CD debts. Now, that also is something that is being considered, and that is there. So I go back to what I'm saying. There are solutions that we ourselves are championing and that we have proposed. The problem we have is we don't have the willpower politically to actually walk through with all of these issues. That is where we have a problem. Now, I'm looking and reading at what the Minister of Finance is doing, and I'm saying that he has the solutions. When you look at it, if I were in that position, I'll probably do a majority of what he's doing as well. I might have one or two other suggestions, but I think I'll do what he is doing. But whether or not our president understands the problem, whether he can see how difficult it is, and whether he can accept that these solutions will actually work and endorse it and sign off, and whether he will be able to, run through his political base and say to them, look, I agree that this should be done, and I'm endorsing it, and I want it to be done, and so we are going to do it. Whether he has that gravitas and that clout to do it or not is the big question, because everything that we are suggesting is what the IMF is accepting and endorsing, and that is what they're going to ask us to do. But we have to be able to do it for ourselves as well.
Paul.
Yes, I think the energy issue, and we're going to the IMF for this money, if they are going to give us the money, really, I think it's something that we should be able to do, because looking at other angles that we are trying to raise money from, because you cannot go to the IMF as it stands now for us to get the money to come in, pay the wages of public sector workers. That's not going to happen. And yet we need to pay them, because that's basically something that we need money to do. So getting money from the Eurobond that we are going to use, I think 1 billion or so Eurobond they are going to issue, possibility of gold price on the world market going to go up, and the cocoa price maybe might go up. Those angles, trying to get money from that side. So those money which are coming in from that side can be used to support the public wage system that we are all, because the government is not going to cut down on that, because it's something that they are still, creating some schemes which is going to take some government money to pay those who are going to go there.
Let me just pause you there and let you continue.
Yeah.
You see, there are 13 major mines in the country which are all owned by foreigners. Is there no way the state can also just own just one mine where all the gold that comes out, is for the state? Does it work? Or
yes, we can, but we have a history. We have a history in terms of managing our public institutions. Okay, so with that sense, government was
manager.
Yes.
Just get a management team to run it.
Yes, it would be simple, and we did that when we were Ashanti Goldfields until we sold it off to Anglo Gold. And now we are finding that gold prices are a problem. You see, it's not as simple as that. Yes.
Well, life is not easy, is it?
And yes, it is. Yes, it is simple. If you can actually do that and allow the manager to be independent enough to do what he's tasked to do, you'll be okay. But we do get royalties. We do get taxes also and dividends from the mines. In quite a few of them, government has a certain small say.
Yeah.
So you do get money from it. It's not like as if we don't get anything at all from it.
Yeah, but at the moment, the revenue coming from gold, apparently we get more from exporting, yams, cassavas, and akrantia. We get more dividends from that than we do in gold.
I don't think so, because when you export your yams and your akrantia, it's private enterprise mainly.
But to bring the money back.
Well, they bring the money back, but they're supposed to tax them on profits. And I'm not sure that their profits are high enough compared to the profits that you make, from a gold concession and gold mining. So I don't see that angle.
I'm sorry I deviated, but I'm just trying to find money from the state.
It's good. You're trying to find money for the state, which is good. There are many things that we could do to bring money in, and the most important and significant one is government should stop interfering with everything in the market. Okay, government wants to control everything. It's controlling petrol prices. It's controlling what it's paying to cocoa farmers by giving them free fertilizer, spraying for them for free. Everything is doing for the cocoa farmers. All these things cost the government money. And yet, cocoa farms and cocoa farmers are supposed to be private, independent companies. You can give them loans, yes. Like we do every year, we're syndicating money for them to use in order to be able to buy the cocoa of the farmers. Nothing wrong with that, because you guarantee them a market, you offtake. So it's fine. But they're making profits. And you have to make sure that you tax them adequately. Any business, any enterprise here, government's focus has to be, how do I manage to collect my taxes from these enterprises? That is where government is falling short. Currently, the companies that are consistently taxed are overburdened with so much tax. And we are not focusing enough on how we are going to be able to rake in more tax revenue. Every time I've had discussions with anybody who's in the Ghana Revenue Authority, the answer has always been, oh, it's a challenge. It's not easy. And I said, yes, if it was easy,
you wouldn't have to hire
you wouldn't have to, exactly.
You wouldn't have to hire.
You would do it all. So I'm coming back to what I said earlier. The problem we have in this country is the political will to implement the things that we have put on paper that we know will work. That's our problem, okay? The political interference is way too much, and they don't have the guts to do what they know is right. Or, if that is not the case and I'm wrong, then the only other alternative is that there are too many interests invested, too many vested interests in certain areas, which is making it difficult for government to make that kind of decision. Paul, let me
bring you in for just 1 minute. Agriculture. I mean, will the IMF help us in agriculture? I mean, over half the country is in one form of agriculture. I mean, that's an area, if you neglect, you've neglected literally 50% of your country.
Yeah, for me, Ghana, like many countries in Africa now, should have been net exporter of food, not net importer of food. And as it stands now, we import almost everything in agriculture. We just, subsistence scale that we just produce 1 or 2 stuff that we consume in this, almost everything that we want to consume on a larger scale, we have to import. Rice is very high on the agenda now. We see trade ministry and the other ministry trying to say that we're going to place a ban on importation of rice. Really, I do not see how we are going to do this in the next 5 years or so, because you don't have any clear, concrete substitute.
Will the IMF help us in an area like that?
Well, if we are going to present our case to them, we are going to present the challenges we are facing in the economy. They are going to look at it and prioritize it for us, because if we are not going there, I'm not sure we've already prioritized the things we want to do. So you go, they're going to prioritize it for you. Depending on how much they want, maybe they can support that, because if you think it's going to support, because a lot of people are involved in the agriculture sector in this economy. So if they say that, okay, for the first 2 years, the money I'm going to give to you is not going to agriculture sector. It's going to these critical areas. Maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, as you're able to comply to the reform that we are giving you, then some amount of money will be given to you to support us. I'm not sure agriculture is going to be high on the agenda this time around.
Well, folks, thank you very much. I'm sure we can carry on. But I hope you've learned a lot. I've gotten a bit of understanding here. But either way, we've always prayed for everything, so let us pray. Thursday, that's my opinion on Joy FM. Do not miss it. And I'm just asking, if we had no gold and no cocoa, are we just going to be extinct from the surface of the earth, or would we have survived? And how would we have survived? So tomorrow, don't miss it. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Thank you, guys. And as I say, we'll be back tomorrow to do it all over again.